All right, guys, day 3 of federalism. Hope you guys are doing well. Today we're going to be talking about what specifically these three branches of government looks like on each one of these levels, the national, state, and local level. So let's get right to it. Three branches of government each? Yes. So far you've learned three branches of government on the national level, but we have yet to do a whole lot on the state and local level, meaning by the end of today, you will know the 9 branches of government for all 3 of the levels for the one nation we know and love, United States of America. Now, that might sound overwhelming because you learned a ton in the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, like the years they serve and what powers they have, where they go, etc., etc., etc. But it really isn't that overwhelming because, fortunately, they're the same concept. A legislative makes laws, executive enforces laws, and judicial interprets laws, just a little bit different on the state and local levels. So like if I were to take here through the power of magic and you're looking at this picture here and it says the 3 branches of the national government, and then I just, yeah, this is my finest work of Microsoft Paint. It's just a little bit different, in other words. Let's go right to it. Before we do that, here it is right here, the 3 branches of government at all 3 levels, in case you want to keep it in handy and useful for your usage. Let's dive right in with the first one. So on the national level, it's the legislative branch that we learn first or third quarter. It's the one in Washington, D.C. They make the laws. You've learned a ton about them, so we're just going to move on from there. The national level's executive branch is the President of the United States, which enforces the laws. And the judicial branch for the national level is the U.S. Supreme Court. It's pretty straightforward in summary. I'm not going to go into the specifics of those 3 branches because we literally spent weeks on each branches on the national level. Let's just move on to the state level. Now, just like a U.S. Constitution tells us exactly what the 3 branches of government looks like on the national level. You have Article 1 saying what the legislative branch looks like, Article 2 with the executive, and Article 3 with the judicial. The state constitutions tell us what it looks like on the state level. Now, these constitutions are a little bit different compared to the U.S. Constitution, but mostly in application, because obviously the U.S. Constitution applies to everyone. State constitutions only applies to that state and their residents. So we listen to the Florida Constitution because we live there, but people in like Wyoming do not care. Another difference is obviously also the length. The U.S. Constitution's 4,543 words and 7,591 words if you include the 27 amendments in that Constitution. State constitutions range anywhere from 20,000 to 40,000 words. In fact, tomorrow you'll be looking more in depth with this with the Florida Constitution, but here's the articles of the Florida Constitution. It has a preamble just like the U.S. Constitution, and it goes all the way to 12 different articles. There's only 7 in the U.S. Constitution, but you'll learn more about that tomorrow. So what does the legislative branch look like on the state level? Well, they're simply known as state legislatures. It's a legislative branch, meaning that they make the laws for that state. And Florida's state legislature is a bicameral legislature, just like the one in D.C. It has a House of Representatives and a House of Senators. Notice, doesn't that seem familiar? Yeah, we conveniently decided to copy what our legislative branch looks like on the national level and apply it to our state level. It should be noted that not all states do this. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but I think Nebraska has a 1-state legislature, but it could be another state, somewhere in one of those flyover states, but you get the idea. So senators and representatives again? Well, yes, but they're state senators and state representatives. They're not meeting in Washington, D.C. These guys meet in Tallahassee. And also the numbers are a little bit different because Florida decided to do them differently. Florida decided that for the entire state of Florida, we should have 40 state senators serving in the Florida Senate, and they should serve for 4-year terms. It's very different compared to the one on the national level where it's literally 2 senators per state and they serve 6-year terms. And for our Florida House of Representatives, again, the one in Tallahassee, there's 120 state representatives in there, and they serve 2-year terms. Again, all these people meet in Tallahassee in the state legislature, and they ultimately are making laws for our state. Moving on, though, the executive branch for our state. Well, that's the governor. He basically is like the equivalent to a president, but for a state. He enforces the law, but on the state level, not on the national level, the state level. So instead of a president in the executive branch for the state, you have a governor. Now, when it comes to that governor, our current governor today in Florida is Ron DeSantis, in case you don't know. And according to Florida's Constitution, in Article 4, Section 5, if you want to be the governor one day, you got to be at least 30 years old and a resident of Florida for at least 7 years. Notice it doesn't say you have to be born in Florida. And they serve 4-year terms, and they have a term limit of 2 terms, so very similar to how the President of the United States works. Interesting thing with those governors, they have their own cabinets as well. Just like how the president has a cabinet, so does the governor. The governor has various other agencies and people to help him do his job as enforcing the law inside the state. So you'll see stuff like a lieutenant governor, elected cabinet members, state agencies, a state national guard, state police. Yes, those state troopers answer directly to Governor Ron DeSantis. But let's go specifically to that lieutenant governor one because that one looks kind of cool. Lieutenant governors are basically the equivalent to a vice president, but on the state level, executive branch. Should the governor of Florida be incapacitated, die, resign, impeached, whatever it may be, lieutenant governor becomes the next governor, just like a vice president would become president. Now, some other people within the governor's cabinet, you have people like a state attorney general, which is very similar to like how the DOJ works in the national government, but on a state level. And you have people like a commissioner of agriculture, just like you have a secretary of agriculture, except this commissioner of agriculture is just dealing with the state of Florida. You have like a chief financial officer who talks about how much the policies are going to cost and stuff like that, just like the OMB and the White House. It's very, very similar. They're all there to help out the governor, whatever the governor needs. But let's move on at this point. The judicial branch on the state level. Well, every state has its own version of a Supreme Court. It's the highest court within that state's judicial system. You can go from Palm Beach County Courthouse all the way to the Florida Supreme Court. And obviously you can go beyond that and aim for like the U.S. Supreme Court in D.C., but that's a story for a different time. If there's ever anything that goes or is questioned in the Florida Constitution, then the state Supreme Court will be the one that deals with it. But mind you, it can only deal with stuff involving Florida laws. Something that you know how the Supreme Court in D.C. on the national level establishes precedents like the Roe v. Wade about abortion, or whether it be D.C. versus Heller, which is owning a firearm, all that different stuff. The precedents established here in these Supreme Courts only establish and affect Florida, obviously, not the other 49 states. Do they have justices, Mr. Shoens? Yeah, they do. But unlike the federal level, there's only 7 of them, not 9. You still have 1 Chief Justice and 6 other Associate Justices. And they serve, at least for Florida, 6-year terms. Now, every state's different. They decide what their justices should be. Pretty much, long story short, the governor will choose a justice, and I'm just kind of short summarizing this, and they'll fill a vacancy, and then once that governor leaves office, it's up to you guys to decide whether or not that justice stays. Then the people vote for them, and then they get 6-year terms, and then they got to run for re-election again, and so forth. Interesting that Florida has decided lifetime terms is not something they wanted to do. Now, do you know any of them? Well, if you live in District 20, like I do, they're actually your representative, Alcee Hastings, used to be on the Florida Supreme Court. And he also used to be on the Southern District of Florida's court. But he was eventually impeached by taking bribes. And then he ran for Congress. Interesting. He's actually the one I met in D.C. when I went to D.C. back when I was a junior, but c'est la vie. So in summary, for at least the state level, just short summary of it, you have a legislative branch, which is your state legislature, you have an executive branch, which is the governor, and you have a judicial branch, which is the state Supreme Court. Now, finally, let's just conclude it with the local governments. Now, there are a certain government, i.e. the local governments, that impact your lives on a more daily basis than the ones in Tallahassee or even the ones in Washington, D.C. That's your local governments. And just like the national and state levels, they also have 3 branches of government. Just don't expect them to be as glamorous, though. Depending on the size of town you live in, it might look really sad and pathetic. Like I use this example here, Clare, Michigan. This is a town I go to every single summer to go visit my family. It's a place where my father's buried and my grandfather, all this different stuff. And when I went to Google because I know Clare, Michigan's a really small town, when I went to Google the Clare, Michigan, like mayor's office, as well as their courthouse and stuff like that, I couldn't find a single image on Google. I literally had to go on Street View and then put a screenshot of it. So not as glamorous, in other words. But if you live like in a West Palm Beach, it can be quite glamorous. So let's start with that. The legislative branch on the local level is your city council. They make laws for your cities, and those laws are known as ordinances that only apply to your city. So if they make an ordinance that says, hey, curfew is at 11 p.m. for people under 18, and obviously that only applies for that city, it doesn't apply for everybody in the nation. They're laws that are enacted by a municipality. What? Long story short, municipalities are local governments with jurisdiction over a defined territory. Um, if you want any more clarity on that, just ask me. I don't mind explaining it, but I know some probably already know it. Let's move on to the executive branch, the mayor. So the one who enforces the laws on the local levels is the mayor. That's right. That's why the mayor exists. That is what the mayor does. They enforce the laws on the local level, and they use local police officers to do so. And they might even be combined with commissioners, or maybe they'll work with city council, all that different stuff. It just depends on what your town looks like. If you live in West Palm, though, your current mayor is Keith James, in case you didn't know that. And then your final branch of government on the local level is your county courts. Long story short, if we didn't have this whole coronavirus, I would say something along the lines of, hey, that's the courthouse we're going to go to for Law Week. Looking very likely that that gets canceled also. Apologies. Would have been great to see some actual trials. But anywho, these are the ones who will deal with when laws are broken, when you have disputes, all that different stuff. And depending on where you live and what your town is, it might be combined with the whole county, such as the Palm Beach County Courthouse, but you get the idea. So in summary, that's your local levels, three branches of government. The legislative is a town or city council, might be a village council, whatever it may be. It just depends on what your city looks like. You have an executive, which is the mayor, and you have a judicial, which are your county courts. And those are your three branches of government on all three different levels. We're basically done with federalism at this point. But tomorrow we'll be looking at the US Constitution versus the Florida Constitution and seeing the differences with it. And then we have an assessment on Monday, which I'll explain more later. Anywho, hope you guys enjoyed this, and make sure you do the worksheet with all the federalism stuff in summary and turn it in at turnitin.com.